Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, Karl Orban, UKIP in Britain, AfD in Germany, the new Austrian president, Hofer. That didn't happen. A narrative is afoot in Europe that the far-right, xenophobic nationalists called populists are sweeping to power. A narrative is afoot in America, in the India of Modi, in the Russia of Putin. That this is the response to neoliberal globalization. And never mind that actually it's the continuation. Smart people are making predictions. See, I told you Trump would win. See, I told you Brexit and the Italian referendum. And never mind that neither Brexit nor the Italian referendum fits. Well, tonight we're not making predictions and we're not about narratives. We're here for a talk about fighting back with some long-term fighters, young and experienced. What are the prospects for a left response? How do we roll back the right-wing illusion before it destroys the world and present a real alternative to the neoliberal order? An alternative of social and economic justice, of peace and democracy, of ecological survival. With us tonight are Sean Sweeney, Natina Vokodza, Kostas Panagatakis, Berganinos, and Joanne Landy. My name is Nicholas Levis. I will be introducing each when their turn comes to speak. I am with a fellow with the History Department here at the Graduate Center, CUNY. All affiliations are given for information purposes only. We each speak for ourselves. And now it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce to you a very good friend of mine, Joanne Landy of the Campaign for Peace and Democracy, a very long-term fighter who really could be the speaker on her own tonight. She could start telling you a story. She could start telling you a story because she's been fighting this fight and fighting it well for so long that she could start telling you a story about being there in Berkeley when Mario Savio was saying that we have to put our bodies, the gears of the machine, on the stage next to the guy who was filming it. You can watch it on YouTube. We were watching it on YouTube, and she says, and I say, "Where are you, Joanne?" She says, "I'm right next to the guy who's filming it." She names the guy who's filming it. So Joanne has been fighting hard and continues to fight hard to this day, including with Aristarchos Neasiorkis, AKNY, Greece Solidarity Movement, akny.org, which is the co-sponsor of this evening. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Joanne Landy.
Anybody need to come in and get a seat? No, you're okay. So first I was going to introduce myself, but he did that. So I'll skip that. I want to welcome you all. Can you hear me? Yep.
Turn off your cell phones, please. Sorry, Joanne.
I want to welcome you all to tonight's discussion, which I think you all appreciate is a very important one. This is not a light moment that we're in. A few years ago, we were filled with hope. In the Middle East, there was the Arab Spring. In Greece, there was Syriza. In Spain, there was Podemos. And even more recently, there was the Bernie Sanders campaign, about which there's dispute whether the road forward is in the Democratic Party or not in the Democratic Party, but it's undeniable that the millions who turned out for him showed that there's a progressive wave in this country, which now is at sea and doesn't know what to do, but does luckily have at least a spirit of resistance. When we saw those millions of people go into the streets after the election announcement, the election results were announced, we knew that there's at least potential for huge resistance to the monster who is our next president. But meanwhile, we are faced with the harsh reality at home of the growth of the far right, tinged with racism. Not that everyone who voted for either Brexit or Trump is a racist, but that's a part of the mix, and will become more and more part of the mix if things are not turned in another direction. Bigotry, misogyny, dangerous forms of nationalism abound, both in this country and, as the list that Nick gave you, in Europe. So the first imperative is resistance, and we've seen these encouraging signs of the resistance. But we need more than resistance. We need an alternative. Let me go to my second page. So I don't know how many of you saw that Jeremy Corbyn gave a speech last weekend at a group convention of socialist parties in Prague, I believe it was. Yeah, and I thought he really summed up the situation. I'm going to quote what he said. Politics has been shaken across the world. As socialists and progressives, we know very well why the populist right is gaining ground, and it is up to us to offer the political leadership needed for a real alternative. We know the gap between rich and poor is widening. We know living standards are stagnating or falling, and insecurity is growing. We know that many people rightly feel left behind by the forces unleashed by globalization, powerless in the face of deregulated corporate power. In many cases, the populist right do identify the right problems, but their solutions are toxic dead ends of the past. They are political parasites, feeding off people's concerns and worsening conditions, blaming the most vulnerable for society's ills, instead of offering a way for taking back real control of our lives, the elites who serve their own interests. But unless progressive parties and movements break with a failed economic and political establishment, I think this is the key idea that you'll be hearing from all of the speakers tonight, it is the siren voices of the populist far right that will fill the gap. So our first speaker, Sean Sweeney, will discuss Corbyn, whether the road that he's taken is good. If he has any criticism, he'll offer those as well. And so the purpose of our meeting tonight is for each of the countries that we have represented here, Greece, Spain, and England, or Britain, sorry, to evaluate the strategies that have been pursued so far, and then to generalize whatever lessons we take from that for our own country and for the future in Europe. So we're not going to be limited to discussion of these countries, but they are, each of them in their own way, examples of strategies that the left has followed or is following. So without further ado, let's begin with Sean. Do you want to introduce him in detail first?
No, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
You don't need to. No, let's get on with it. I can.
Get on with it, okay.
If you don't mind, sorry, I just don't think it's. No one listens to that, and they shouldn't. There we go.
You'll never know.
Okay, I'm gonna stand if that's okay, so I could see everybody. You know, that was an excellent framing. I was actually going to end with a quote from Corbyn because I thought it was kind of significant. The quote on the weekend in Prague. The question, though, can the left actually win, raises a question, well, what are we trying to win? Survival is a victory in this period. If we can keep the left going as a reasonably robust force around the world, and particularly in Europe, that would be good. If we can get governmental power in several countries and use it forcefully and have some programmatic unity and some beginning of a vision of an alternative, that would be a victory. If we could take a big step forward to realizing a truly egalitarian democratic socialism that can begin to put behind us the horrors of capitalism, social, ecological, and economic. But I want to spend, the 10 minutes or so I have on Corbyn in the UK. I qualified my comments by saying, although I joined the Labour Party as a teenager and was very active in the left of the Labour Party and the trade union movement for a long time there, I'm not following the minutiae of the politics on the left in Britain. Although I work very closely with British unions, and there's some encouraging developments on that front. But I think it might be useful just to review how do we get here, a little bit of the history for those who haven't been following the British Labour Party for a long time, and I would forgive most people for not wanting to do that up until recently. I'll start in 1974, and believe me, this is not going to be very long, but just a quick overview. 1974 was the first IMF structural adjustment program of the neoliberal period. It was the pre-period of neoliberalism, but it was basically an imposition of a left government into power, leading to a spread of capital, a run on the currency, which was the pound, a devaluation, and inflation. So here you have a Labour government with fairly left, relatively left program, including nationalisation of key sectors that weren't already nationalised, and you got this response from capital. And it was basically, you know, a statement of intent on the part of capital that we will not tolerate this sort of project. We saw it in France in 1982 with Mitterrand as well. And how did the Labour Party respond? It largely capitulated. It tried to manage the crisis. And by 1979, although there was a mild improvement, it wasn't enough to stop Margaret Thatcher being elected. Thatcher was elected, though, it's worth remembering, because this comes up a lot in today's politics, with 29% of the vote. Not of the vote, of the eligible voters. 39% of the actual vote. So this was never a mandate, but look what they did when they get power. They never used the word privatization in the Conservative Party manifesto in 1979. Never mentioned the word privatization. Within 4 years, half of British public services have been privatized, and during her second term, the other half was privatized, except for national health, which was marketized and largely privatized, albeit in the name of preserving the National Health Service. So this was the kind of the context of the moment. The re-election is worth remembering. This was the time of the Falklands War, or the Malvinas War, some people call it, in 1982. The tabloid press went gung-ho of strong leader versus weak Labour. Labour was capitulating to the Argentinians. And Thatcher was re-elected again with a 29.5% of the electorate voting for her. Again, not a mandate. It's worth again remembering that the Social Democratic Party split from the Labour Party, and between them they got 58% of the vote in the 1983 election. And yet she forms the government and engages in a counter-revolution and a fight on public services. So the shift going on in the European left it coincides with this. And what we saw in Britain and in Europe was then social Europe, the idea of Jacques Delors and the social charter and the Lisbon Agreement begins to look like left-wing politics in the context of these victories of the right and of the neoliberal onslaught. So you see union leaders and the left, including some, maybe even the Labour Party left, clinging on to this idea of social Europe. And this is important to realise, because when we look at what's happening in Greece and what's happening in Britain and where the social democratic parties are, they still have this belief. It's a neurotic obsession with social Europe and the idea that Europe is in some way progressive, and the idea of Europeanism is progressive. So fast forward to the 2015 election, which Labour lost when it thought it was going to win. And there were a number of issues. One was the rise of UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party. And I think this really should be, give us some pause, as in with all the rise of the far right parties, of what did the left not do that it should have done. And I know this is a controversial thing to say, and I discussed it with Joanne earlier. The free movement of people in Europe was a neoliberal policy. And the left gave critical support to it because they didn't want to be seen to be anti-immigrant or against the European project. But at the end of the day, it was obvious what was happening. In my country, in Britain, you could see fairly left-leaning people get more and more sucked into an anti-immigrant narrative, and the British working class don't discriminate between refugees and workers who are coming on a work permit, who are largely in the service economy. They show up for work on time, they're bright, they're entrepreneurial, they don't have tattoos, they don't give the finger to the boss, and they don't have any trade union consciousness. That may sound like a stereotype, but it is close to reality. And that is, with the absence of a left critique of basically the immigration regime of neoliberalism of Europe, there was a lack. There was no way of engaging the working class around this key question. A secondary question, and work I'm involved with, is the climate debate. the trade union movement and the Labour Party went along with a largely neoliberal approach of addressing climate change. Let the private sector drive renewable energy, let's put a price on carbon, and let the market do the rest. What did that mean? It meant northeast of England, northwest of England, even though it was only a small factor in the deindustrialization, the employers blamed the carbon price as a primary reason for the closure of major factories and the movement of factories elsewhere. So all of this adds up to a sort of a right-wing backlash.
2 more minutes.
Yes, 2 more minutes. But again, if you look at the, that's very quick, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry. If we look at the, what happened with the Brexit vote, you can see that only 25% voting to leave named immigration is the main question. The rest, 49%, was by far the most, said it was loss of control, loss of autonomy that was the primary reason. So now on to Corbyn. Corbyn made a mistake on the Europe debate. He thought there was going to be a Remain vote, and he didn't want to be in a situation of being on the wrong side of the vote, and so he gave a soft endorsement to staying in Europe. But really, he was not really in favour of it. And Brexit opens up opportunities for the British left that wouldn't have happened if they stayed in Europe, in my opinion. But let's have a look, actually, very briefly, at what the Corbyn phenomenon is in terms of some hard numbers. First of all, we've seen the Labour Party now is the largest it's been probably in the post-war period in terms of 600,000 people joining. They joined primarily for one purpose, and that was to vote for Corbyn. And the majority of the people joining are younger people. So this is not a revolution, but it certainly is nothing to be sniffed at in terms of rebuilding the left. The movement for Corbyn was started by two 40-plus activist women in the centre-left who said we've had enough of Blairism, and they got a Facebook page together, and they convinced their MPs to nominate Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn needed 35 members of Parliament to be nominated as the leader, and he got 34. And so he went up to somebody who was he's married to his niece, and he said, you mind, just voting for me to be leader just for the sake of debate? And the guy has never lived that mistake down. So he got the 35 votes, won by a landslide. He outnumbered all the other candidates, and has been addressing around Britain audiences of thousands, even in small towns. So this is a very encouraging movement. On the downside, of course, Corbyn is under attack by the right wing of the Labour Party and the media, but the Labour Party, even under Corbyn, despite all the negativity, is still polling around 28-29% of the vote, with a leader who's unapologetically left, anti-war, is not frightened to use the word socialism, speaks about human values and the need to base society on everybody caring for each other, which is resonating in a culture of cynicism, individualism, materialism, and xenophobia. So this is actually, I think, although my perspective for Corbyn would be that I doubt very much the Labour Party can win a majority in the next election, although, to be honest, that's 4 years away and anything can happen. But I do believe the left, the Welsh and Scots nationalists, the Green Party, with the Labour Party, have the possibilities to cobble together a centre-left coalition. It won't bring us socialism, but it could be a bulwark against the right. But more importantly, that 28% and all those tens and thousands of people coming into the Labour Party is the basis really for a new left politics, both inside the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party. So I would say, though, in closing, if I have time, my time hasn't, my watch hasn't gone off yet. I said it for 13 minutes, didn't I?
Yeah.
Where am I? Oh, I've got 51 seconds. All right, so here we go. Oh, I went for 13. I borrowed an extra minute.
Okay, that was built in.
I think what we're seeing is a growing up of the left. We're going to see it in this country as well. From the protests, Occupy, the squares, the mobilizations, into the electoral arena without leaving behind the protests, but actually supplement it with electoral politics, and now realizing that we can't rely on charismatic individuals or not so charismatic individuals to lead us. We have to do not just the day-to-day political work, but we need to do the programmatic work. Because I think this, at the essence, at the end of the day, is if we can't offer a vision of an alternative society, we're not going to succeed. So the left can win if it has a compelling inspiring vision. And I would say that transitional demands had their place in the left 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now we should be talking about transformational strategies. What do we do in the likely event that we will have governmental power somewhere in Europe in the next few years? We don't want to see a repeat of Greece, but there will be other opportunities. We need to seize those opportunities, and it's the responsibility of the international left to make sure we have a compelling vision to put before people and to mobilize them into action. I'll stop there. Thank you.
We have we have four real scientists today. She was born in Madrid, Spain, where she participated during the 90s, her high school years, in the protests to defend public education. Later, during her college education in Autónoma University of Madrid, she was a member of the biology students group that, among other things, organized a conference against the European Constitution in 2004. At the same time, out of college, she was an active member in her community as a member of the United Left, the youth of the Spanish Communist Party, and the Anti-Fascist Coordination Group of Madrid. In 2007, she moved to Barcelona for her PhD in genetics. In 2011-12, she participated in the Indignados movement in Barcelona that took the squares across the country like Occupy Wall Street, except about 100 times bigger. Forced partly by the economic recession in Spain, she moved to New York City in 2011 and became a member of Socialist Alternative and collaborated with Podemos-USA. So, thank you, Cora, for coming tonight.
Right? And during the next years, all through the 90s, basically the Social Democratic Party and the right-wing party, People's Party, alternating power with each other and basically rolled back completely all the welfare state. They imposed different labor reforms, completely diminishing workers' rights, and they basically privatized the entire country. And the cherry of the pie came obviously in 2008 with the crisis, and the first thing that this Social Democratic Party did was rescue the banks. And basically Spain, that was had an average debt lower than the rest of Europe, suddenly after the rescue of the bank was in the top 10 list of the most in-debt countries. And of course this came from Europe, the imposition of austerity to fulfill the GDP limit, the debt limits. And I could give you many numbers here, but basically right now Spain has become the second most unequal country in Europe and the second with highest level of child poverty. And basically it means that in these 2 decades, all the things that my parents' generation fought for were completely destroyed. Fortunately, the dying welfare state was not the only legacy of my parents. Actually, they also gave us a legacy of movement, and we very fast, inspired by the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, we took the squares in the Indignados movement, and this movement quickly evolved to a more concrete movement, anti-austerity tides, that basically organized resistance against different issues, like for defending the public health, in defense of public education, against evictions. And actually these movements that were extremely successful, just to give you an idea, in 2013 there were more than 218 protests all across Spain. This movement was able to partially stop the attacks. And for instance, there was the withdrawal of a very reactionary counter-reform on the abortion law and local elections, and also they caused the resignation of the justice minister and the healthcare minister. But the reality is that despite this show of strength, in 2011, right after the Indignados movement, there were elections and the right-wing party win. And as a result, further attacks were implemented. And this is the first lesson that I think I would like you to take from the Spain experience, that in order to really provide a left alternative, we need to combine movements in the street with also conquering the political arena. We need a party for working people, a party of the 99%. And that's exactly what happened in Spain. In 2014, Podemos, this new party, basically took the language of the 15M movement or the Indignados movement and ran into elections, right? And this very fast changed with all the demands of the people in that moment on the street. And in the first elections that it ran, just a few months after its birth, that was for the European Parliament, it won 1.2 million votes. That's excellent. But the problem came in the next step, right? Podemos was faced with a very critical question that any new parties face. How can we broaden our support? How can we appeal to other voters? And in this moment, Podemos did what I think, in my opinion, it's a terrible mistake. What they did was moderate their language, right? And trying to appeal the social democratic voters, what they did is reject many of the radical demands that they had in their program at the beginning. For instance, the non-payment of the debt or the universal basic income for all were a scrap of their program. And they also posed mobilization as just a show of support of the party, not as a tool for really change and push demands. And one of the consequences is like they start going down in the polls. And at the same time that they were going down in the polls, there was this relatively new right-wing populist party going up, Citizens, that had the exact same language against the political caste and against corruption that Podemos had, but completely neoliberal policies attacking workers and even, well, terrible. And basically that's, I think, the second lesson that I want you to take from the Spanish experience, that the reality is like unless the left can really build a strong alternative, right-wing populism is going to grow up. And I think this is important today for United States with Trump, but also, as Nicolas was saying at the beginning, all across Europe we have Le Pen, UKIP, and the reality is like unless the left can build a real alternative, the prospects are really bad. But then moving forward, in 2015, last year, in December, we had general elections, and basically electing Congress, Senate, and Prime Minister. And unprecedentedly, the first time in the history of Spanish democracy, the two major parties couldn't form a government. And we spent 6 months without a government. Actually, nothing really happened. But we got new elections in June 2016, this year. And this time, Podemos ran with the traditional left party, United Left, but they still got in the third place. And the result basically put this social democratic party that I was talking at the beginning as the hinge for government. Basically, they could choose to support the right-wing government, or they could support Podemos and United Left and form a left government. And what happened here, I think it's a very important lesson for all of us. The leader of the party, Pedro Sánchez, was elected in a program of providing a bloc to the right, providing change, providing an alternative. And I think he really believed that, and he tried to negotiate. But despite all his good intentions, the reality is like the right-wing side of the party make what can be called a coup. Basically, with the support of CEOs of companies and one of the biggest media corporations of Spain, so-called Certain Left, they basically put an ultimatum to Pedro Sánchez that either he supported the right, the People's Party, or he was done. And effectively, he resigned. And some of the congressmen and congresswomen of the Socialist Party revolted and voted against this government, but the reality is like, at the end, we had a right-wing government. And it's difficult to predict what is going to happen right now, but I think that unless there is an internal revolt in this Social Democratic Party, the most likely scenario is that it's going to implement austerity policies with the right wing, and it's going to follow the path of PASOK and disappear. And I think it's not by chance that all the social democratic parties across Europe, from Syriza to the French Socialist Party, are all going to the same path, in deep internal crisis. And we got yesterday just the referendum in Italy, right? A rejection on Renzi's presidency as Democratic Party leader. And I think that what we need to understand is like after the economic crisis, there is no room anymore for negotiation. There is no middle ground. The social democratic parties are using a tactic of the past. And capitalism today cannot provide as it used to be able to provide after the post-war boom, economic boom. Right now, we just have two possibilities: austerity to keep growing the profits of the corporations, or break with the system and provide an alternative for working people. And we cannot take a middle ground. We really need to take sides. And I think that's the third lesson that I want you to take from the Spanish experience, that either the new left formations provide a way forward and really side with the people, or they are going to end up in constant crisis. But in order to provide this alternative, it's going to be necessary to break with the system and to break with what it's established. And particularly in Europe, it means to break with the rules of the European Union. And of course, all this that I'm saying, it's very logical, but if we cannot appeal to the morals and the good intentions of the economic establishment, what can we do, right? What can the left do? And I think that we can believe in the 99% when it's united, right? And not only in Spain, but all across Europe. The 99% that rise in support of Syriza when the European Union was really pushing hard. The 99% that built the campaign of Bernie Sanders here, rejecting corporate money. The 99% that has won a victory in Standing Rock recently. And if the left is going to provide an alternative, it needs to provide a program that can appeal to this 99% internationally. A program that can unite all the people across the world, even if that means to break with the system. And I think that unless we do that, Shen has mentioned what happened with Brexit. The people is going to find a solution either on the left or on the right. And we need to be courageous to be able to provide certain leadership. But besides providing a program that can unite people, we also need a strategy. How are we going to win whatever we are proposing, right? And that means that we need to organize people not only to vote, but also to organize mass mobilizations that can defend this program and that can fight for this program. And for that, Podemos or any other new party need to get people active in democratic structures in the party. So we can democratically discuss what do we want to do. How are we going to do it? How do we organize? And really make the 99% protagonist of the change. And this, I think, is the last conclusion of my talk, that it's crucial for Spain or any other country across the world, the revival of these socialist ideas, the understanding that we can change the system, that we need to change the system and provide an alternative. But for doing that, we can only rely in the people organized, in the 99% of the organized, in the working people organized, because that's the only way in which we are not going to be forced to water down our demands. And just to finish with a little bit of hope, the reality is like these discussions are already happening in the Spanish left. United Left, this traditional left party, in 2015 already expelled all the more right-wing elements of their party. And in Podemos today, after the results of the last elections, there is a crisis and there is a discussion between Pablo Iglesias that is trying to recover the more radical speech of the origin and the more right-wing elements that are appealing to moderate and keep moderating the language. And the solution of this struggle is what is going to determine if we are really capable of building a left alternative in Spain. And if we can conquer both the streets and the political arena. And the last piece of hope that I want to give, in October this year, in the 26th of October, the Student Union of Spain, which is a group that is co-thinkers with Socialist Alternative, organized a student strike that brought into strike more than 2 million students all across Spain. And Pablo Iglesias, for instance, recovering its radical legacy, mobilized for this also. And the reality is like that strike has won an important victory. One really conservative reform that the right-wing government trying to implement had been stopped and removed. And this has inspired further movements again in Spain to defend the public health. And I think that this is really important and can really pave the way for the left political alternative in Spain, and hopefully can all merge together this new political party and the movements on the street. And I think that if that's what happened, this could be a new hope for Spain, but also it could inspire all across Europe and all across the world. And it could be once and for all the beginning of building a country and a world run for millions, not by millionaires.
Thank you, Cora Bergantinos. In recent years, it's been my honor also sometimes through AKNY to work with Kostas Panayotakis He is a professor of sociology at New York City College of Technology in the CUNY system, and he is the author of Remaking Scarcity, From Capitalist Inefficiency to Economic Democracy, from Pluto Press. He has written and spoken extensively on Greek politics and the global economic crisis. Thank you, Kostas, for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Here. So after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot of talk among politicians, scholars, and the chattering classes, of which I'm a proud member, about the end of neoliberalism. A few years later, it is clearly that the death of neoliberalism has not materialized. To be sure, there was a brief Keynesian interlude, which involved government spending in the immediate aftermath of the crisis. This was government spending of governments around the world, and it helped to prevent the crisis from becoming the kind of deep and widespread depression that we experienced back in the 1930s. However, the hold of the financial sector over governments has clearly not been shaken off, has not been upset, and the response to the crisis that governments have adopted has not even tried to, address the proximate cause of the crisis by meaningful financial regulation that could prevent another similar large-scale crisis from taking place in the future. So instead of the end of neoliberalism, we have experienced lingering economic stagnation and an equal distribution of the benefits from such an even recovery as may have occurred in different parts of the capitalist world. So these benefits have primarily gone to the super rich and the capitalist class, adding therefore to the benefits that this capitalist class drew thanks to the bailouts of the financial sector and assorted transnational corporations in the immediate aftermath of the crisis. Meanwhile, the mass of the population has had to fend off for themselves, scrambling to keep their job or survive unemployment, to keep their home or cope with homelessness, and to deal with the adverse effects that austerity has had on their access to education, healthcare, and other essential public services. All this is especially true for Europe, which has navigated the crisis even worse than other affluent capitalist countries, such as the US. While the US government has not done enough to mitigate the impact of the crisis on ordinary citizens, working people, the policies in Europe have seemed to be designed to aggravate the crisis as much as possible. In particular, what has happened after the original response to the crisis with its bailouts and fiscal stimuli combined with a fiscal fallout from the crisis to greatly increase public deficit and public debts of the different European countries, massive austerity became the norm. This was not only true of peripheral European countries such as Greece, Portugal, Italy, and Spain, which were hit especially hard by the transformation of the global financial crisis into a sovereign debt crisis. It is actually true across the European Union, as the crisis was used to, in effect, constitutionalize austerity and balanced budgets for all member countries. So Europe basically has adopted the crazy kind of far-right idea in the US that was discussed a few years ago about, having, I don't know if you remember that, the balanced budget amendment and all, sort of mainstream economists came out saying this is crazy. Well, in Europe, this crazy idea that was associated to the far-right fringe of the Republican Party is now, the rule of the land. So this last development, by the way, in the European Union was merely a manifestation of a more general pattern that was true of the European Union even before the financial crisis, even though this pattern, of course, has become accentuated since the crisis. This pattern is using the European project and its rhetoric of bringing together the peoples of a continent that had suffered in the past by very bloody, wars and conflict and so on. They have used this rhetoric, for which the European Union actually got the Nobel Prize a few years back. They have used this rhetoric to basically restructure European societies in a neoliberal direction. So the austerity policies demanded by European elites as well as the IMF have been accompanied actually by other structural reform policies, as they are called, that were supposed to counterbalance the contractionary effects of austerity and to produce growth. These structural reform policies have included privatizations, the liquidation of labor protections and collective bargaining rights, all of which have been part of the neoliberal toolkit inside and outside Europe alike. Needless to say, far from restoring growth, these structural reform policies have aggravated the effects of the original crisis and the austerity response to it even further. Greece is a paradigmatic example of this, since its simultaneous adoption of austerity and neoliberal structural reform increased unemployment to over 25% for the general population and to 50% of young workers. This is not a surprise, of course, since in an economy in a state of free fall as a result of economic crisis and austerity, policies such as making layoffs easier or liquidating bargaining rights and reducing minimum wages and salaries do not lead to increased investment or the creation of the large number of jobs missing, which in the case of Greece is over 1 million. Instead, the effect of such reforms is to aggravate the collapse of aggregate demand, thus leading to new waves of business closing, disinvestment, and layoffs. As expected, these developments have greatly increased discontent and restlessness among ordinary people throughout Europe. And in a sense, this would seem that as the ideal context for a resurgence of a left, which left, of course, has been in a state of lasting crisis since the rise of neoliberalism after the crisis, the international capitalist crisis of the 1970s, and later on the collapse, of course, of the Stalinist regimes headed by the Soviet Union. So, but this resurgence has not occurred any more than neoliberalism has died. To be sure, there have been movements of resistance against neoliberal austerity and its brutal effect on ordinary people. These movements, combined with the effects of the crisis, have even helped to unsettle the political alignments, especially within countries of the European periphery, such as Greece, Italy, Spain, and Ireland. Reflecting the discrediting of the political elites and parties that had dominated the political systems of their countries before and in the early phases of the current crisis. These changed alignments for a time gave hope that a new anti-austerity front could be forged across the European South and beyond. At the forefront of this hoped for anti-austerity wave was Syriza, a self-proclaimed party of the radical left, which managed through its searing criticism of the Greek austerity program and its devastating effect on ordinary Greeks to grow very rapidly from a negligible force to a contender for power, which power it finally achieved in early 2015. Running on a platform of reversing austerity while keeping Greece within the Eurozone, Syriza has at the very least performed one valuable service. This service was to put to the test the viability of this platform. As it happened, reversing austerity within the Eurozone proved not to be viable. And when things came to a head, and Syriza was forced to choose between the anti-austerity program and Greece's continued membership in the Eurozone, the Syriza government opted for the latter. Ever since, Syriza has continued the austerity policies that its socialist and conservative predecessors embarked on, and has done it successfully enough to earn accolades from segments of the European elites, which recognize that Syriza has been able to pass through socially devastating austerity measures with much less social resistance than its political predecessors. It is not now it's an open question whether the political left in Europe, has learned from the Syriza experience, and perhaps that would be something that some of the other panelists could, enlarge on. And what I mean by that is that the main lesson from this experience is not that acute social and economic crisis can lead small leftist parties to break the often unshakable, the seemingly unshakable duopoly of center-left social democratic and Labour parties and center-right conservative parties. The main lesson, I think, is that the parties of the radical left that accomplish this feat have to be prepared and determined enough to take the radical actions necessary to stick to their programs when the going gets tough. And I should add here that popular movements that make it possible for these radical left parties to achieve this feat have to, rather than becoming apologists for the party that they see as their representative, they have to basically put pressure on this party, even after it gets power, in order for this party to actually be more likely to stick to its original program. So if this lesson is not learned, in my view, the rise of Syriza will prove to be a footnote of European history, illustrating not only the failure of the left to respond effectively to this crisis, but also it will illustrate the contribution of this failure to the channeling of people's growing discontent with the neoliberal status quo in a racist and xenophobic direction. And with this hopeful note, I guess I'll close my initial presentation.
Thank you, Costa. Everybody's saying political economy should be brought back, but very few people are actually applying it to cases. If you saw me looking on my phone before, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to get the exact statement from Nadina Vogonza as she posted it a few days ago online. She is busy bringing political economy back to particular cases. You may have read her work in the pages of Jacoban. She is a PhD candidate in sociology. You're already a candidate? So fast. And a member in sociology at NYU, and a member at the UAW Local 2110. And the fact is, as soon as she was a PhD student, she started organizing this chapter of UAW of the graduate students at NYU. And that's one of the reasons it exists. She has studied the Greek left and the Greek right, and is now examining the logistics sector in the United States. She's currently organizing with other union activists against Trumpism. I'm proud to have carried this banner with her and Despina Lalaki at the first anti-Trump protest in New York. Unfortunately, it didn't work yet. If you are a union member and would like to get involved in these efforts, you can approach her after the event. I'm sure she'll bring that up herself. Thank you, Nadina, for coming today.
To all of you for being here. I have the good fortune, I suppose, of following a set of speakers with whom I seem to share a key set of basic assumptions. And that's good news for you, because that means that I'm condensing my talk in real time now. And I'm just scrapping basically the introduction and noting that the upshot of many of these presentations is that the left is still struggling to forge a clear strategy around which it could mobilize the sort of base that Syriza, Podemos, Corbyn and Sanders have shown exists. That is not to say that the far right has forged such a strategy, or that the far left hasn't formulated demands or even programs. We have. But if there's anything that the Greek experience has taught us, it's that 1, demands and programs are a necessary but insufficient condition for building power against the forces of capital. And 2, the game in capitalism is always stacked against the far left and only sometimes against the far right. It is for this reason that we need a strategy that puts up serious defenses against the rising tide of the far right, while making real advances against the economic foundations that are propping up establishment politics. Now, there's a reasonable impulse, as I noted in Sean's talk, to view our current situation as fluid. To take the European context, the discrediting of the EU that has been signaled by the Greek, British, and now Italian referenda could indeed trigger the first stage of its demise. But what might it mean for this process to unfold under the potential leadership of the far right, at least in the core economies? How should progressive forces relate to its common commitment of dismantling the Eurozone, at least in theory? Here at home, the question has been posed even more sharply. If Trump follows through with some of his promises to reverse free trade or create jobs, could that be an opening for eroding the neoliberal model? How do we intervene in the coalitions that would be required for these initiatives to succeed? Or do we simply wait for them to fail? Can we afford to even wait? At a general level, I agree that there is an opening for the left in this moment. But to seize this opening, we must draw some very clear red lines based on what we've learned from recent experiences and more broadly from the historical record of the left. And what that ultimately comes down to, as the various speakers already have noted, is a very basic premise of the class struggle, which is that under no circumstances should we concede our disruptive power, especially as we attempt to go from a defensive to a more offensive position. So I'll make my case through 3 interrelated claims. First, I will reject Syriza's insistence that it can get from its creditors the sort of debt relief required for implementing a redistributive program. And based on that, I will argue more generally that a strategy of breaking with neoliberalism must be anchored in a politics of confrontation, that elites are not going to discard this economic governance model unless they are forced to. Second, I will argue against a strategy hinged on collaborating with the far right on any of its initiatives in hopes of accelerating neoliberal breakdown, or even one of waiting for them to demonstrate their incompetence. And last, I will argue that in the process of necessarily playing defense in the short term, we must vie for a mass politics rooted not just in a vision for socialist transformation, but a concrete plan that accounts for the constraints imposed by productive and ecological forces today. And just to keep time constraints in mind, I should note that empirically supporting that first claim is going to take up the bulk of my presentation. So I'm just going to logically derive the next 2 claims, and we can discuss them later on. So let me now turn to dispelling the illusion that Syriza can secure debt relief from its creditors. Yesterday, the government claimed that it secured a, quote, national victory on that front. But that's simply an overstatement. What the creditors granted Syriza yesterday was a lowering of interest rates and an extension of its repayment period. But as for a reduction in the value of the debt, Syriza's request was yet again rejected. This will keep the debt level at 180% of GDP and the constraints on growth as tight as ever. So to understand why the creditors are remaining intransigent on this point, we need to understand the accumulation model powering the Eurozone, the persistent problems that this model has been posing for its managers, and any possibilities for reform. So let's start with the foundations of the Eurozone. By now, it's clear to most observers that the monetary union was not, as initially claimed, a stepping stone towards some kind of European political integration, as the tools that would have harmonized the Eurozone, such as a federal budget, never came into fruition, even in the midst of a banking crisis of historic proportions. It's thus now become largely accepted, and I'm sure this is an assumption accepted by you, that the key impetus for monetary integration was not political unity, but the production imperatives of economic elites, particularly those based in the European core, and specifically Germany. The basic story is this, and I know that some of you have already heard me, give it, but I'm just going to give it again because I think it's important for all of us to have the basics. Following the 1970s crisis, Germany retained a large share of its industrial capacity, and thus, as a leading exporter, was prone to having its currency rise. The Japanese and later Chinese fix to this problem was to send capital abroad. Germany chose instead to create a larger monetary bloc through which it could externalize the costs of price stability. Internally, Germany restricted demand through wage restraint, thus reducing its level of imports, while externally, other countries were unable to devalue, keeping German exports competitive. Meanwhile, more peripheral economies like Greece and Portugal served as export dumps with easy access to German and French credit. And so Germany could maintain its export-led growth model while transforming what in the 90s was a current account deficit into a current account surplus by the 2000s. There were two key problems with this setup, however. The first was an integration of economies with vastly different productive bases. As we all now know, the Greek solution to this arrangement was an accumulation of sovereign debt that went toward financing public-private works, such as the construction projects associated with the 2004 Olympics. But this fix soon backfired when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, amid which combined levels of public and private debt skyrocketed with investor speculation, so that by 2009, as Kostas has already described, the Greek banking system was on the verge of collapse. This prospect endangered the stability of the entire monetary union, as European elites had yet to fully integrate their banking system and institute the mechanisms necessary to dissuade speculation, contain a Greek exit, and prevent a domino effect. And given that the German growth model still depended on the viability of the monetary union, with something like 70% of exports remaining within the EU, European elites were vulnerable in that moment. It is this weakness that could have enabled the Greek left, which by 2011 was on the offensive, to leverage at least the threat of a default toward getting some kind of debt relief. This, of course, would have required both some kind of disruptive capacity on the part of the Greek working class to ensure that domestic elites wouldn't sabotage any contingency plans, as well as a political commitment from the left to activate that potential. Now, at this point, we don't need to recount yet again the whole story of how the leading faction of Syriza thought it could simply win over its creditors by exploiting what it thought were differences among them, and how it sidelined dissident factions that argued for a more confrontational approach rooted in organizing their base and breaking with the euro. We all know what went down 2 summers ago. So let's take stock of how the creditors have responded to Syriza's request for debt relief since then, as this is its remaining source for legitimacy as a governing project. This brings us to the second persistent problem of the Eurozone, and thus a potential opening for debt relief. If we were to describe the key monetary trend in the Eurozone this past decade, it's been one in which Germany has been driving down current account deficits in the periphery without adjusting its current account surpluses. German exports now constitute 47% of its GDP, surpassing China this year with the biggest export surplus in the world. This means Germany has to continue exporting capital to the rest of the world, yielding a savings rate that now exceeds its domestic investment rate by a 3-to-2 ratio. This is a problem for global recovery because when one of the leading economies saves more than it spends, world demand is lowered. And this is partly why Obama and the IMF spent most of last year, after Syriza's capitulation, urging the Germans to lighten up on the Greeks, with even the European Central Bank joining the chorus through an extension of its quantitative easing program. There was an even greater interest motivating the IMF, that is, its core interest in reproducing itself as an institution. And a major threat at this point to this interest is the likelihood of default, as it is simply impossible for a continually contracting economy to meet its repayment obligations. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna go a little over. I told my dad I was gonna go a little over, and he was like, "It's okay, you're Greek." So, yeah. So yeah, it's impossible for Greece to meet these repayment obligations, and the IMF knows that, and they want to avoid yet another Argentina and a blow to its credibility as a lender. So by last spring, specifically in April, the IMF was plotting to force Germany's hand by fomenting what they called a credit event, which essentially would have been a mini financial crisis. Part of the plan would have been to impose even harsher austerity terms on Greece in the short term in order to save face with German taxpayers who would yet again be enlisted in the bailout effort. Tsipras, of course, wouldn't be able to justify those efforts to his own constituency, so he took to the pages of the Financial Times and rebuked the IMF for playing with Greece's fate. What really mattered, though, was that Merkel wasn't playing ball either. Moreover, since then, Schäuble, lovely man that he is, has met each inquiry about debt relief with something like, and this is basically a direct quote, "It won't help Greece. Syriza needs to buckle down and implement more austerity, and if it doesn't, it will get the boot." That's what he said 2 days ago at the start of the talks. So now we can ask, why this continued intransigence, when at this point, politically and even economically, the future of the Eurozone is at stake? I think there are several reasons. First, during the mini panic last April, there was an immediate political rationale. Between the refugee crisis and at that time an impending Brexit referendum, Merkel was concerned with maintaining stability in the Union. Restructuring the debt, which effectively would mean an admission of a failed lending program, could lead to some kind of destabilizing consequence. So she wanted to avoid that. Of course, that plan didn't quite work out. And the response, however, has been to double down. This brings me then to the second reason behind German intransigence. What German elites risk in increasing transfers to the periphery and potentially raising inflation would be not only emboldening left-wing forces in the periphery, but moreover, shaking up labor relations domestically. For price stability doesn't only maintain export competitiveness, but moreover, since the post-war period, it's been an effective tool for mitigating labor militancy within Germany. Why tamper with this arrangement that has weathered other crises, especially given that the immediate banking crisis has been for now ameliorated? Studies from the European School of Management and Technology now show that 95% of all the money loaned to Greece has gone back to German and French banks, and less than 5% of that has gone into the Greek economy. So the short-term cost of extending and pretending is less threatening to German elites than the long-term costs of destabilizing prices. It's for this reason that I don't think the Greek government can reason its creditors into a meaningful deal of debt reduction. And the upshot really is that it was only that first opening of leveraging the threat of default and pursuing a confrontational strategy that could have seen some kind of breaking out of the neoliberal straitjacket, at least in the Greek context. So, what do we draw from that experience? Now we can turn to those other two claims that I initially brought up by way of conclusion. The key lesson from Greece is to never relinquish, as I said before, our disruptive capacity. And I fear that some of the talk orienting to the right-wing populist wave misses that basic point. So let me shift gears now, put on my US labor hat, and examine the responses of the US labor movement to Trump's election. Of course, the labor movement has many limitations. I would in no way call it a left-wing force, but I do believe that it would be the bedrock of some kind of progressive movement in this country. So far, what we've seen is unions like the Teamsters, the building trades unions, the United Auto Workers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and a few other unions say that they would support those aspects of Trump's agenda that would bring growth and jobs. Now, forget even the fact that this negates our defense of workers immediately under attack, be it through deportation, incarceration, Islamophobic and anti-black policies, anti-abortion measures, and so forth. And forget that this negates our defense of a workers' movement under attack in the form of likely a national right-to-work legislation and whatever else the Republican-controlled chambers will roll out. Let's just look at what this work with Trump sometimes approach gets us on the shop floor, where our power is more clearly concentrated. We've already seen the results with the carrier workers in Indiana, where Trump announced last week that he had preserved 1,100 jobs slated to be offshore. As it turns out, only 730 of those jobs were actually secured. 400 others will in fact be lost. And in exchange, as Sanders also had noted, the corporation that owns Carrier will get a set of tax and regulatory breaks in that state. That might be an obvious example. Let's turn to my own union, whose leadership has said that it will support Trump in an attempt to renegotiate NAFTA, which is rightfully cited as one of the factors that has shed jobs in the auto sector in the US. Their logic in making this kind of statement is that limiting foreign competition in the manufacturing sector would allow the UAW to increase its bargaining power with the big three automobile makers that are concentrated in the Midwest. But that ignores the major industrial restructuring that we've seen in the auto sector, which is basically an influx of multinational plants in the US South. You might ask, why isn't the UAW focusing on that? Well, that would actually require organizing those plants through a militant strategy that would probably be a little too risky for the leadership to take on. So I can get into this later. I have a lot of thoughts. There are some UAW members here as well. I just want to kind of plant that seed just to get you thinking what we're actually giving up when we're saying that we might work with the populist right on some measures. We're not just giving up our defensive capacities. We're giving up our ability to use the only tool that's going to put us in an offensive position, and that's our disruptive capacity. So I'll leave it at there for now, and we can continue in the discussion.
I just want to assure people that we're going to allow the speakers generous time during the discussion so that unanswered questions can be answered, and you can also talk with each other. I'll go more into how the Q&A session will be structured, but we have an announcement first.
Yes. Is with AKNY, Greece Solidarity Movement,
thank you
for
for
many
being
years,
here
founding
today,
member.
and our speakers. December 22nd, I hope you have all signed up so you can receive the invitation. A little party fundraiser we will be doing for a couple of squads in Greece that they support, they house, they care for refugees in Athens. And we will have it in Astoria, quite accessible, 10 minutes from Manhattan. Okay, don't be like intimidated. And yes, something like 8 to 12 will be, as I said, fundraising. Forgetting anything?
At the coolest
And I
place in
hope-
Astoria, by
I
far.
hope we can all see you there. Bring your friends. Close to? Yes, it's right behind like the Moving Images Museum. So you will receive information, okay? I hope to all see you there.
If you want to make sure to get the invitation to this party, please write your name and email clearly here, and we will send it extra to you. Okay, so Joanne.
Okay, so we're going to go into the Q&A, and the Q, it really should be Q&A. In other words, we don't demand that you ask a question. If you have a comment, that's fine. So you don't have to twist a comment into a question mark at the end. But we will impose 2-minute limits, so you can ask or whatever. And then, in an organic way, we'll come back to the speakers. So if you put your hand up and would like to ask a question or make a comment, please do. Like, and please give your name if you can.
I just want to give a comment. Marcus, can you, Joe, I don't want to be on the camera. I'm a German anti-fascist. I'm living in New York City now since a while, and of course, you can imagine that not only me, but several other people are highly concerned about this Donald Trump election and the rise of fascism, not only in the United States, but all
Can
across
people
the
in the
globe.
back hear you?
No.
Yeah, why don't you
Stand up, stand up and-
because otherwise, you don't want to stand up?
I speak a little louder,
Okay,
maybe,
fine.
okay? So, as I just said, I'm a German anti-fascist. I'm living in New York City since a while. As you can imagine, a lot of people in Germany are right now pretty much afraid about the Donald Trump election, the rise of fascism here, and across Europe, of course. As it looks, I mean, many people know there's a German election coming up next year, which will be pretty much important. We are concerned that the alternative party for Germany might win big. They're right now still on 50 to 20%, which could likely result into a coalition with the Christian Democratic Union, Merkel's party, to govern Germany next year, which will pretty much be a very worst-case scenario. But the Social Democrats, who basically were one of the key problems, of course, in Germany if it comes to neoliberal austerity politics, seem to move now strongly to the left. But more important is that the automobile crisis, through Volkswagen and others, led to a decision by the management of this major capitalist company in Europe and on the globe to switch to electric cars. They, together with Ford and others, decided to invest heavily into an electrical grid so that you can, pump electricity into your car, so to go from Hamburg to Munich without, having any trouble. That will transform, and the digital revolution is a lot discussed about, that will transform the society a lot. I think the basic problem why the left actually did not really win is we didn't have a lot of answers on the question on how to change the political economy or how to take into account the political economy. We were focused more on the political questions, so democracy and so on, but less on the question how to change the way how we produce things, what we produce, and what is necessary for the future to be. So I'm just saying, and they are all in line, of course, to form, of course, also a transnational movement to push into that direction.
Okay, Joe?
My name is Joe Friendly. I have a website, joefriendly.com, and another website, joefriendly.org. And I have a website, peacefulrevolution.us. And I've actually taken myself quite seriously for many years, trying to solve the problem you're posing of articulating the alternative. I've really tried to come down to what is the language we can use. JoeFriendly.change is language I came up with in the 90s, but I'm talking about, as a people, creating a government in waiting with a national discussion about how things ought to be with a clean slate in terms of redistributing from the 1% to the 99%. Totally. The idea is to give a new meaning to money for respect of the testicles to the extent that people don't get bossed around, but that in fact leadership only on the basis of freely given consent, full human dignity. I try to use that kind of language in the alternative. But hello, anybody else want to play as far as can it be done? Can we offer to Democracy Now! The task of a sequence of speakers to give meat to the bone, to actually offer the public an opportunity to vote a consensus? Yeah, let's do the switch. Let's create a real democracy instead of a sham democracy. And we can use our cell phones a lot, but I'm trying to learn from everything you're talking about, like how the business world responds when you want to rearrange things. But I'm saying let's do it. Let's face out loud the Bernie people, the whole revolutionary movement. There is another website called thenewsystem.org where they try to package new language. But I do come forward as saying let's do it in America.
Thank you, Joe. I want to say that Joe, we really owe Joe an enormous debt of gratitude. He comes to forums, and the Left Forum, and around New York, and publicizes everything that we have, and he's a really important voice for us. So thank you, Joe. Oh.
Hi, my name is Dimitra.
Are you camera shy?
Yeah, I don't want to be on.
Okay.
My name is Dimitra.
Okay, but can you stand
Yeah,
so the
sure.
people can hear you?
I'm from Greece originally, also an American citizen. And I'm from Greece originally, also an American citizen, and an architect and professor. And thank you all very much for your information and knowledge. I have a question generally. What I'm exploring is the intersection of art, architecture, politics, and I'm wondering how we can collectively, one, find a way to understand the system, and also have other people understand the system and really understand the loopholes and the way things are structured so that we can hack it, and thinking of alternative ways to hack the system, both from an artistic to a legal point of view and where the bridges are between that, and then finding an alternative. So, I mean, my thoughts are very much inspired by what you guys said. And the question is, like, how do we move through those 3 steps? And a big first barrier is understanding the system. So,
There happen to be more than 1 or 2 architects in this audience, or people who study architecture, so you might all want to make a beeline for afterwards to talk. Okay, I think my friend here would like to say a couple words.
Oh, I just have the broadest possible, most general questions, but I hope they're useful to you. Sean and Cora, you both were talking about the mechanics, the structure of electoralism, and how to get past the obstacles that, the necessity, first of all, of having a party of the people, but also how to get past the kinds of hurdles that you have where a majority even can vote against austerity at any rate, if not for a party of the people, and yet we get results such as are produced in this country by the Electoral College, such as produced in the UK by the first past the post winner take all system where Thatcher can win with 29%, as you were saying. And in Spain, I presume, I don't know, is there like a direct proportional representation in Spain? No, so similar problem there, that people, you need to somehow get into the state but the vote is not really representative. So there's always this extra obstacle structurally, and what is the right way to address that? Is it too technical an issue to be talking about instant runoff voting in this country, for example, or the like? Or how can this be conveyed popularly? And then for everybody, I guess, for Costa, who's written on this, and Nantina as well as everybody, this I think the problem that Marcos was bringing up before, sorry, somebody was bringing up before, it remains relevant. How do we orient organizing labor in this economy that's so getting so efficient at just eliminating it? The jobs aren't being outsourced to elsewhere as much as they are just being done away with through efficiency and technological advances and labor intensification and all the means at the disposal of capital today, automation, etc.
Okay, I'm going to call on myself for a quick question. I'm going to call on Alan for a question, and then you guys could be thinking not only about answering the questions, we'll go next, but also if you have any comments or disagreements or applause for each other, please do that. So I just have a small question, which was, Nantina, at one moment you seemed to be saying that Syriza missed its moment and it's all over. Now, I don't assume that that's what you mean, but perhaps you could elaborate on that when you get there. Okay, Alan?
Hi, my name is Alan Akabos. I'm with KKNY, the Socialist Alternative. I think this is a very, very good discussion. I mean, we should, for a moment, take a moment to look at the world, right? Like just this week, 2 million Korean workers on the streets trying to bring down the government. There's in country after country, there is instability. There's huge crisis of the political parties that exist and of the status quo. And I think that's one of the features of this period, which is in the aftermath of the economic and social crisis that's engulfing the world. I think that the issue with Syriza, if there is a silver lining in that, in any way, it is that in fact it will force the left in Europe and internationally to try to address the question we're trying to present today, we discussed today, which is there a way forward for the left? And I think it is very good that a lot of comments that come in, it is that there is a way forward. I mean, it has to be informed by an alternative to neoliberalism and to capitalism, and so on. That's one of the things. But it is easier said than done in a certain way. The issue is precisely how to do that. And one of the answers, I think Corb mentioned, and Sean and other speakers gave an indication, is in the direction of people mobilizing, moving to the direction of struggle, which is necessary in order to do that. We've seen that in Ireland as well, with partial struggles against austerity, or against the water charges, or limited struggles, which in this period can be useful to mobilize people, to begin to organize them into that. The second thing is in relation to the need and the urgency of building broad political parties of the working class. And I think that's something that you begin to see now. I mean, in the case of Corbyn and the Labour Party, as Sean was pointing, in many ways you can see the outline of two parties inside the Labour Party. One is the Blairites and the apparatus, with a conservative neoliberal agenda that they've been defending all along. On the other side, Corbyn and the forces of the left striving at the moment. But that, of course, will be determine the future of politics in Britain. If there is a breakthrough of the left, of the politics of the left, to break with austerity, to break with the current system, I think that can open the door, if you like, towards that. So it is, I think, there's many good things that we can begin to, we need to seek and we draw conclusions for us for ourselves and for the struggles that we need to take in the U.S.
Thank you, Alan. Let's go to you, and then Richard will be next. All of you, whoever wants to say something.
We're coming back.
Yeah, you're on. Each of you, all of you.
Who do you want to call on first?
You guys decide.
You spoke up first.
Spontaneously.
Okay, I could jump in.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. I think the key question in the whole discussion, and is this question of what would it mean stick to the program. You know, just to repeat back what Costa said, I think it's a very important thing. And the question that Nantina raised about, you know, a willingness to confront. So here you have programmatic commitments and a willingness to confront. And I think we have to answer that question. We have to look at that scenario. What does that actually mean? I had the fortune or misfortune of being in Greece on July 15th during the day of the capitulation, and stayed for a conference right across the street from the Greek Parliament. The city was up in arms. You know, there was great energy in the city, disappointment, but political debate. And there was two sides to that debate. There was those who basically said, we're staying with the Eurozone because that's what the Greek people want, and the alternative is too terrifying, we would be out of power within 3 weeks. That was more or less, in a nutshell, what was being said. And the opposite view was, no, we should have confidence in the people, and we should mobilize the people to take responsibility for the Oxy vote and to prepare for Brexit, prepare for Grexit and organise accordingly. But it was what was missing, I think, in the discussion is those who recommended the latter, of course, which many of us in this room would probably support, weren't really convincing that the negatives were not going to be really hard-hitting. And when we did look at the public opinion in Greece at that particular moment, there was a bit of a kind of want your cake and eat it. We wanted to fight the austerity, but we don't want to leave the Eurozone. And I think that was that should have been addressed from day one when Syriza was in power, to try to prepare for that scenario. It didn't do that, and that's the fatal mistake, or the big mistake, one we can learn from. So I think that that question is, what does it mean to stick to the program? And I'll conclude by this, and let others people contribute. Had that happened, a year and a half has passed, what if Greece had, it may not be, you know, it's not going to have full employment, but what if it had a mobilized population, providing for them, trying to provide for themselves, farmers growing for domestic consumption, people doing a sharing economy, helping each other out. We already saw glimpses of that in the doctors' movement in Greece, providing free expertise and services and medicines when they can get their hands on it. If that was the way forward, it would show to the rest of the left in Europe and the world what could be accomplished. Now, I'm not saying there wouldn't be some terrible negatives associated with that. We know what capital is capable of doing. We've seen it all over the world. So I don't think it's going to be a one happy big socialist experiment and everybody's going to suddenly follow suit. But surely we have to try. On the climate work and the renewable energy, I had conversations with Syriza people. I said, you've got a golden opportunity here. You import all your oil, all your gas, you have a fuel bill up a waz, you have air quality which is the worst in Europe, and you have 300 days of sunshine and no solar power, except for thermal solar and a little bit of public-private partnerships, which is rubbish. I said, invite people from around the world to come and build the solar revolution under popular and democratic control. They will be flying into Greece to help out, to volunteer their labor and expertise. There are ex-scientists and expertise and ordinary workers around the world who would love to be part of that project. And that's just one issue that they could have mobilized on. It was a missed opportunity. Let's make sure we don't miss the next opportunity, because that opportunity will come sooner rather than later, in my opinion.
Okay, that's very inspiring what you said. And I think the fact is that in any one country that makes the first breakthrough, it's going to be difficult. Okay, and so I think you're important in talking about the opportunities that are opened up, but part of preparing people is also saying it's going to be tough, but we have a stake in inspiring others by showing what we can do together, and we can do more if more people are into it.
Just I can follow up on this. And also the difficulty also depends on the size of the country involved and the size of its economy. So Greece, one of the problems with Greece, of course, it's a very small country. I mean, larger countries like, you know, Britain or, you know, Italy or Spain or France would have, you know, much more leverage. It's easier for the European elites to think that they can contain a problem like Greece, especially once the crisis was beyond a certain stage where they had taken certain measures to protect their banks and so on and so forth. But another function, of course, is the sort of the size of the country. And I think there is a general sort of hunger for change that can take very different forms, as we've discussed. It can take a progressive form. It can take a sort of very reactionary form, and which of these forms it takes partly depends on the effectiveness of the left. And as the Syriza experience has shown, it is not enough for the left to be able to channel it in a sort of seemingly progressive direction. And I think one of the problems is that it is very tempting for the political left to try to capitalize on people's discontent by taking the easy way out. In other words, by underestimating the obstacles it will face once it gets power, by trying to, even if it recognizes the obstacles, to try to downplay these obstacles in order to basically assure people that it will not be the end of the world if we get power. And I think that was part of the problem with Syriza, that it didn't prepare people about the difficulties ahead, and I'm not sure that it's like there are different interpretations. One interpretation would be that, the leadership would be cynical liars and they knew that they didn't mean what they said. I think another interpretation, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, would be that they were deluding themselves, or they had they were genuinely not prepared, because people had been asking the Syriza leadership for a long time. I mean, this was like, if you watch panels on Greek TV, before Syriza got elected, that was always the question that people said. You're saying that Merkel will agree to what you're saying, what if she doesn't? And they didn't really answer that question. They basically said, oh, she will agree with us. And you can see, in a way, if your goal, of course, is to get power and to sort of move to the center because you think that's how you're going to grow and be able to get enough votes to get power, that's a tempting strategy to adopt. And, in Syriza's case, it sort of worked. I mean, Tsipras is the prime minister of Greece right now. So from his point of view, it may have worked. But the problem, of course, is that if you follow this strategy, then when your rosy predictions prove to be, not correct, then there is a problem, right? And so I think this is, important to realize, and in a certain way, it's important for the left not to fetishize electoral power in a way, that in a way it might be better not to get power to begin with than to get power and then contribute to people's cynicism, because now people see Syriza, and Syriza looks, for many people, it looks exactly the same as every other political power. And in some ways, people might be even more resentful of Syriza because many of the people had actually hoped that Syriza would change things, right? So they may sort of turn on them even, in a more sort of passionate kind of way. And ultimately, there's, when you have examples like that, there is no, better proof of the Thatcherite sort of axiom, there is no alternative, than actually having a party of the radical left, elected on an anti-austerity platform, basically getting into power and within 5 months doing the opposite from what it had supported. And the last point I want to make about the whole issue of the Eurozone, Greeks wanting it to have their cake and eat it too. One thing we have to say here is that, the whole issue about the Eurozone was kind of a taboo topic in Greek society. And this was not really, this did not get the open kind of discussion that the topic deserved. And I think if this discussion had taken place, Greeks might have been much more open to that than the polls suggest. And of course, we know that the polls are not very reliable. The polls you know, regarding the referendum, where over 60% of Greeks voted against austerity just a couple of days before the vote, was showing that it was like very close and that the yes side might actually be ahead. So
I'm just going to make a brief comment, and then I know Nantina wants to say something, which is just my own view about the Eurozone, was that I think it would have been a mistake for Syriza to get up and say, vote for us, get out of the Eurozone. I think they should have rather said, these are the things we're going to do. Not pay the debt, not privatize, start some of the environmental things that Sean spoke about. And if they don't let us, we're going to face this together as a society. Because I think that putting the cart before the horse and saying, vote now to leave the Eurozone would be giving away the store, but on the other hand, preparing people for the kind of disruptive defiance that they needed to do, and preparing them for the fact that this may lead to a confrontation with the Eurozone would have been, I think, personally, the smart way to deal with this. Okay, Nantina and Cora.
Yeah, I agree with that approach, and I largely agree with these other comments. So I'll first answer Joanne's question, which is that politically, I do think Syriza is now a bankrupt and finished project, because it's shed itself of its militant cadre. It doesn't actually have local power. After the capitulation, people wouldn't even take municipal positions or basic positions in different arenas. And at this point, it's parading around what was just an extension of a repayment period as, quote, the national victory of debt relief. So it's you've already heard my analysis why I don't think it's going to get that debt relief, and why I think that's going to bring it problems as soon as the spring. I think the only thing that it's going to be hanging on until then is the fact that, I would say, Costa, people hate PASOK and New Democracy more. There is such deep-seated bitterness against these establishment parties that they say, well, at least they're not them. At least they're not the people, you know, who allowed this mess, you know, all these decades, the people who, you know, were abetting Golden Dawn and these kinds of forces. So I think that's the only thing that it's hanging on right now. But when this debt stuff hits the fan, I think that we're going to see a political crisis for Syriza. But that doesn't mean that the Greek left is finished. Today, actually, is the anniversary, as Dimitra would probably know, and other younger people in this room, of the December 2008 youth revolt in Greece, which began when the cops killed 15-year-old Alexei Grigoropoulos on December 6th. And so it always is a day of reflection for people my age in Greece. People who I would say put the left on the offensive starting from the mid-2000s. If it weren't for the student movement of 2006, 2007, if it weren't for the youth revolt of 2008 and the kind of regroupment that it triggered on the left leading up to 2010, I don't think we would have seen the kinds of militant and really creative forms of actions that we saw between 2010 to 2012 that were able to put Syriza on the map and the road to power. So those people, they're kind of reflecting on basically the past decade. And one of my friends, he kind of wrote, mostly it's a disappointment because ultimately we weren't able to translate a revolt, something, with, not of the magnitude, but in form that resembled May 68 for the people who experienced it. They weren't able to translate that revolt into a revolutionary current. And that has left a lot of people from that generation understandably very bitter from that experience. I have, some answers, I guess, for why that didn't happen. I think partially it's because, unfortunately, the left, even though it was on the ground and it made some good moves and had good instincts around new kinds of political actions, such as with the Squares movement. This is, now saying the thing that I always say, it didn't take the questions of political economy seriously enough, so that people weren't able to answer these very basic questions. Well, what do we do when we transition to a new currency? Do we devalue it? Are we going to impose capital controls? What do we do? And people would have very stock answers. That's why I keep saying programs aren't enough, because they're not a strategy for how this tiny, tiny country is going to be able to survive. I agree with you that you could probably channel a lot of international energy around things like solar, or even, basic solidarity networks that would grow in a default situation. We have already seen that with the Argentina example. In 2001, in the early 2000s, when they defaulted, the alternative currency networks there, the Red to Troy, they expanded to 5 million participants, basically within the course of a couple months. And I think that would happen in Greece in a default situation. So you would have those basic kinds of things, but you also need to figure out how Greece would be integrated in the global value chain, because it wouldn't be socialism tomorrow. And so I think things like solar would make sense. At the time, I was also talking about things like taking seriously the fact that Greece had a port that's strategic globally, and that there was interest around beefing up the logistics sector around that. And that actually would be something to be used to finally confront the stranglehold that the shipping class has in Greece, and I can get into that later in the discussion. But this is all to say that these were opportunities then, and I think that the left, as it regroups these young people, as they've been showing their solidarity with the refugees and building really amazing kinds of initiatives like the City Plaza Refugee Center that houses all these refugees and that ensures that refugee children are going to schools. Through these kinds of basic forms of solidarity making, I think the left will be able to regroup, and hopefully they will take these political economy questions more seriously moving forward. I had some thoughts on automation and also reaching people, but I think I've spoken too much, so I'll take that up in the second round.
Not too much, just enough. Cora?
Yeah, so I want to touch on a few things that have been mentioned here, and I want to start with the question that Nicholas was putting forward. How can we pass the obstacle of the democratic system, right? Like, is in here bipartisan in my country, Spain, it's also set up for keeping the two main parties, etc. And I think that we need to acknowledge that in the system we live, everything that is set up by the state, it's favoring the status quo, it's favoring the ruling class, right? From the system of democracy, from the police, from the judicial system, etc. And I think that that's something that we need to really consider. But in really posing how can we really make an alternative against that, I think it's really important what Kostas was saying also, that we cannot fetishize electoral power. And I think that we need to recover a little bit the old way of organizing, right? And I think I would like to bring here the example in my university, Columbia. The grad students are also organizing with the UAW. They have elections tomorrow. And the way that these grad students have organized have been door knocking, going to every floor, having a pile of names of students, going to talk to them every week to counteract all the attacks of the administration and creating a network of people. And I think that that's what we need to do in the society as a whole. And obviously I mentioned before that socialist alternative, one of the proposals that we put forward is that in order to generate this network, we need a new party, right? A party of the 99%, something like that, that can really bring together all the struggles that are happening right now, like BLM, like against climate change, all you can imagine, and of course also unions. And I think that these spaces are important to not only get people involved, but also to really discuss what are we doing, right? Because I think I can come up here with all whatever and tell you A, B, C, and D, whatever I would do, but the reality is, like, in order to put people to fight for it, to put people to risk their lives for it, they really need to believe on it. And I think that the only way to really do that is if we create conversations and spaces where we can definitely do that. And, you know, I could mention things that are happening in Spain, but I guess that's not as important right now. I can come back later. And then just a brief thought in how to organize labor. I think that technology, it's true that it's reducing a lot the number of workers, but at the same time, one worker can stop production. And I think that that's something that we need to keep in mind, that really, you know, it's maybe more difficult to reach and organize workers, but at the same time, if we achieve, we can really stop the country. And I just want to finish with this question of the party of the 99%. Like, I'm mentioning this, right, but in the United States, we are far from achieving this. And I think like the key question for that at this stage is really people, we need to realize our own power, right? We really, in order to, for all these nice words that any politician, whoever can tell us, to really make it real and really stop the cynicism of the last years, we need to really experience what we can do when we are united, right? And one of the things, for instance, that Socialist Alternative did in Seattle, we had a city council member elected there, Shama Sawan, and it's one of the examples that I always like to put of how do we win $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle versus how did SCAU win $15 an hour minimum wage. What we did was organize the people to bring together unions, to bring together community organizations, to create these spaces of discussion of what are we going to do, door knock, and create really a big coalition of people, and put a threat in the mayor that basically wanted to delay the things, and tell him, look, if you are not passing 15, we are going to do a referendum. And in 6 months, we won $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle. And I think that that's something that we need to take home. And right now, the whole Trump situation really provides a possibility of generating these spaces. One of the things that Socialist Alternative wants to do, and I think that we should talk after, it's really create like bigger spaces where we can organize the resistance against Trump, right? We are calling for students walkout in the 20th and 21st, and in the 20th and in the 21st we are going to join the big march of women in
January.
In January, yeah. What did I say?
Well, you said 20th, 21st.
Sorry. An inauguration day, exactly. And I think like if anyone wants to help us, please reach me out of the talk. We are trying to put together all the organizations, and this is happening all across the country, and see who can help us to build this. And in these spaces, start discussing what are we going to do next? How are we going to defend our immigrants, brothers and sisters? How are we going to defend our African Americans? How are we going to defend, etc., etc., etc.? And really get people active and ready to build resistance. And from this, we can start talking about next steps.
Yeah, being as how it's 9 o'clock, this is what I'm suggesting. So we take one question from Richard, one from this side of the room, and then give, okay?
We've also, she's been raising her hand for a while.
I didn't see that, okay.
In the back.
Yeah, but then if we want to give each of the speakers a couple minutes, we're already, so okay, Richard, Nancy, somebody from this side of the room?
How about Bonds, because she's been raising her hand.
Who?
Since the
Oh, this side. That's it.
Whoever you're saying, I don't know who you're talking to.
Stand
with
up.
the hat over there.
Oh, okay. All right, so you three, and then we'll get very brief final comments from you guys.
But make sure to tell us how to end the power of the ship owners in Greece, because it's about time.
Over drinks. It's going to take too
Okay,
long.
so Nancy
In
or
30
Richard,
seconds.
whichever one of you want to go first.
I don't know. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, mine is very brief, and everyone here, I think, agrees that
Speak up,
changes
people.
we need to make can't be done in one country. They're all connected. And I'd like to hear what, if any, movements, connections, in programs, et cetera, there are between the left in the various European countries.
Barbara? I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up before. Go ahead.
Okay, Barnes, my question is for Nantina. Since you were talking about the German current account and relations with the periphery, et cetera, I was wondering if you had anything to say about German-Polish relations, especially with production and logistics, since you mentioned you're also studying that and organizing that's going on in that capacity.
I was just going to say that I hear a lot about the we're all on the edge of the breakthrough and we need to push the movement and this and that. But what I don't hear is and we need an alternative and so. But what I don't hear is what is the alternative? I mean, I don't hear the word socialism here, except for Sean and briefly. you know, and in the movement, I mean, if you look like Syriza, you know, Podemos, you know, my God, the 5-star party in Italy, what are they about? You know,
I wouldn't put them in the same category as Syriza and Podemos.
yeah, I mean, these people have no vision of an alternative society. You know, they're talking about to get elected, but once they get elected, then they just carry out austerity and disgrace themselves. You know, I just it seems like what seems completely obvious to us is that you need to have an alternative vision of a bottom-up democratic socialism and eco-socialism. You need to completely remake these societies. You need to, I mean, I'm an eco-socialist, so I think we need to substantially de-industrialize a lot of America and Europe. We need to just close down a lot of industries and create a public works program for all these people that need to be employed. We need to nationalize the oil companies and shut them down. I'm sorry, but they just need to be shut down. And we need to talk about the same thing with the auto industry in Germany, for example, which is a completely wasted industry. It's just a disposable product made every year just for no purpose whatsoever, but to sell you a new one the next year. You know, what we need to do is remake those 1960s Volkswagen Beetles. They could be rebuilt forever. And didn't change much. They were easy, something modern, but like that. You know? We need to completely re-envision our whole economy and cooperation and volunteering and abandonment of consumerism and airplane flights everywhere and modern cars, and we just need to we have a world you know, the Antarctic ice sheet is cracking and breaking up. You know, the world is just the ecological world is just crumbling, and we're sitting here talking about electoral stuff. We need to put forward visions of an alternative world that's completely different than this, and I just don't hear that coming from Podemos and Syriza, and a little bit from Corbyn. Just you know, at least he's a socialist, you know? But I don't hear that much. You know.
There's one hand up there.
Yeah, quick one. Now, when we're talking about countries like Greece or countries that are on the fringes like that, we cannot just focus on the economy and forget about everything else. Nadine, I got this thought when you were speaking. Greece has Erdogan right across from it, right? And an open border to millions of people waiting to cross. It's very easy to close the northern border and leave Greece, you know, abandoned there to deal with a huge crisis, with a Middle East that is boiling. Okay, so when we are evaluating Syriza, we cannot leave that out of the evaluation. Foreign policy is huge for Greece. It's not only size, it's location.
I'm just going to briefly comment. I'm using the chair, position of chair, which is to say that I think you've reminded us that the solution to these problems also lies in countries that are not Europe, that in the Middle East, if we're going to solve the refugee problem.
We live in a bubble that is only you know, left politics. We have, countries have other considerations. And this is a huge
Well,
consideration.
all I'm saying is that the hopes of the Arab Spring need to be revived and to think about ways to realize those as well as the hopes of Greece or Europe. Okay, I see one more hand, and then we're going to go back to
I'll be
the
real
speakers.
quick.
Yeah, good.
Be real quick. And you don't turn the camera around. I don't do that.
Don't turn around.
My name's Aaron. I'm a PhD student in political theory, and so a lot of my frustrations. I'm just looking at my notes. So I'm glad that we are at least in agreement that we need to abandon neoliberalism. What I'm worried is that we're not including modernity and economic solutions to climate change within that abandonment. You know, in truth, addressing climate change will demand a reorganization of society out of capitalism and movement to embrace concepts of degrowth, international cooperation, and participatory democracy. So the left must have a consistent message that can be located separate from the current Democratic and GOP party ideologies. In truth, a third position needs to overtake the other two, which is worrying about the five-star movement, not in the eco-fascist sense of what five-star is trying to do, but actually presenting ideas. We talk about presenting alternatives and socialism, but we actually aren't presenting concepts and ideas for people to get behind. And so that's why I think the failure of these conversations goes, is we're not actually telling people, here are the new concepts that we're trying to implement. And the Five-Star Movement is doing that, and that's why it's such a threat to Italy, in my opinion.
Okay, I'm going to put in my 2 cents again and just then turn it to speakers, which I think this discussion of consumerism, growth, deindustrialization, the future, what would socialism look like, that would be a very important discussion to have, because I don't think we agree about it, but I think we also agree that there are vital environmental constraints, and that we're not going to be able to solve the questions of equality and justice without a fundamentally different system, a socialist system, which is controlled by people. But I don't think we can, in shorthand, resolve the question of how much consumerism would be left, how many airplanes would you fly, and so forth. Those, I think, are the part of the questions that need to be discussed. Okay, I'm going to turn this back to the...
Maybe we should do that as the follow-up meeting.
Yeah,
You know,
I
take
think
it,
so.
take it to the, what's the
Listen,
structure.
we should include you as a final person who wants to speak also, okay, if you have anything.
I just need to get that clipboard back wherever it is.
Yeah. All right, so why don't we go back in the same order we did before, 1, 2, 3, 4. And kind of brief, because we don't want the audience to empty out.
I guess a couple of points. I mean, I made reference to what I would call transformational strategies as opposed to transitional demands. We wouldn't say we wouldn't make demands on the existing system, but until we can show how to reorganize political economy practically in a way that people don't get thrown under a bus, that people can have a reasonable standard of comfort, and that doesn't mean consumption without end. We need to show that, we need to engage people around it, and say it's okay, it's an okay thing, and it's a survival strategy for the planet. And I think increasingly the climate and ecological crisis is becoming a political actor. And that is already happening in the negative in the Middle East. You see Syriza, Syria was a lot of the political crisis there was driven by drought conditions, which is a climate-related effect. We're going to see more of that. And so that's why I really think we need to drill down on the political economy work. And if we spend 10%, if we did that for 10% of the time and resist Trump 90% of the time, we'd still be doing 10% more than most of us are doing right now. And I think we really need to focus on what we would do if we had power.
Okay, I guess you're next.
Oh. Yeah, very sort of epigrammatically, there was a question about movements in different European countries working together. Well, of course, there is the refugee solidarity movements, and another movement that we haven't discussed, but I think it's important, is the movement against the TTIP and the free trade agreements between Europe and North America. And interestingly enough, I think the center of resistance, there is more resistance to these projects in Germany than if there is in the South, where people are sort of, there is not necessarily the same kind of information or interest so far. Now, in terms of the question talking about socialism, I think if you look at the Syriza program, they talk in their program, I mean, I don't know, they probably they may update that in the future as they move towards more sort of mainstream social democracy, but until very recently, their program says that our goal is socialism, but of course the question is, how do you get there? And I think one of the problems and one of the conundrums of socialists that scholars of social democracy have always pointed out is that one of the paradoxes of socialist social democratic parties is that when they have to follow these policies by being a government in a capitalist society, the viability of these policies depends on capitalist growth that provides them with the sort of tax revenues they need in order to implement a welfare state and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, you have the other side of the conundrum is that although you may sort of know and realize that the limitations of social democracy is that as long as you don't challenge capitalism, anything you gain with very hard struggle can be reversed very easily when the power balance changes a little bit. There is, though, the fact that if you actually go all the way for revolution, then basically the large population may have to, sort of be ready for sort of very serious sacrifices in the initial phases of revolution that would...
I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're getting pressure from security.
Okay.
So I want to give the other speakers at least a minute. Finish your sentence.
Okay.
Because I'm a very
So basically, this is a conundrum that Syriza has faced also with respect to the environmental question. And the last thing I want to say with respect to another question, that yeah, it's true that when we talk about economics, we always have to also talk about geopolitics, and it may be true that we didn't discuss that connection enough in this panel, but it's an important one.
Okay, Nantina, then Cora.
Okay.
I think maybe. Go ahead.
Very, very briefly. So on the German-Polish question, so part of the Eurozone was an expansion of production into the east and a dispersal of production across supply chains from Germany into the eastern frontier, if you will. And so there is a possibility, actually. This is just, at this point, the fantasy of Schäuble. But there is a possibility of Germany and the other core economies shedding the peripheral economies and just focusing on the east as kind of a productive base. But I don't think that they would do that, and that then goes back to the concern about basically unleashing labor militancy, not just now in Germany, but among these economies in Eastern Europe, where actually there is some cross-national organizing in the logistics sector. So yeah, I don't think they're going to go down that plan, and that's why I don't think you've seen any class coalitions toward that end. I'm also going to address the foreign policy question. Erdogan is waging all kinds of battles. I don't think it's going to spend money waging another battle with Greece. So I don't think that's the real concern. I think the real concern is refugees. And there's a complete overlooking of the intake of refugees in neighboring states in the Middle East. So let's just set that aside. But second, why is it a crisis in Greece? Because there's a growth crisis in Greece right now. Why is there a growth crisis? Because Syriza ended up not delivering. And so basically we all have to live with that right now. And we can either go down the route of solidarity and embrace basically what's now going to be part of the Greek working class, or go down the route of atomism and fascism. Those are the two options.
Let's give Cora her minute.
Sorry, just part of that. And part of that regroupment, and this is what really amazes me about the young generation of the Greek left and what they've understood, is that those ties are going to be able to build a better left in Greece moving forward.
Okay, so I will be very, very brief. I want to start saying socialism, yes. I mean, socialism is the only solution of really changing things. We need to take the 500 biggest corporations that control the economy right now in the United States under democratic workers' control. And that's the only solution. And that, by the way, is also the only solution in which we can really tackle climate change, that we can really tackle racism, that we can really tackle gender oppression, etc. But the reality is, like, how do we convince everyone out of this room that that's what we need? Because the majority of the people is not in that line. And the reality is, like, because the labor movement, it's probably in its weakest point in history, the majority of the people is looking to electoral solutions. And that's why we need to engage in electoral solutions. And through the experience of the electoralism is how people get convinced that we need to push the system a little bit forward. The experience of Bernie Sanders' campaign in this country really show and expose the reality of the Democratic Party, right, of the DNC, and thousands of people really got one step closer to radicalization. And I think that that's really what the left needs to do, a campaign, and really help the people as they live through their experiences to really draw the right conclusions about the need of revolutionary politics. And I just want to finish saying, like, it was a question of what things are happening internationally, and I don't know many, But I know, like for instance, Socialist Alternative Plan, I know that other organizations are part of an international organization. We are in solidarity with Committee for Workers International that has presence in 47 different countries across the world, from South Africa to India to Spain, etc. And we are all fighting together and interchanging lessons and tactics to really bring a change in across the world. So yeah, I think
What we've learned is there will be a next time, and next time we can make more time for this conversation. It's very unfortunate that we weren't able to get a longer period, but it's obvious that there's a great deal of interest. And so I can't make any big points here, but perhaps we can move, I think, as you're saying, Cora, to this question of electoralism as the unavoidable way of reaching the people. But then how do you move away from the system as presently constituted? Because that can only be the first step. So I hope that will be a theme of a future meeting. I want to thank you all for coming, and also on behalf of Joanne, who organized the whole thing. Please be very kind to the staff and to security outside, and tell them you really appreciate the extra time that we were given. Thanks a lot. Did you make a reservation?
Yes.
Oh, good.
You're gonna go close by?